All right, so I want to welcome you back, Bob Avakian, to the third RNL show. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about it.
Okay, well, in this third show, we're going to get more into the future society, what we're aiming for, what this revolution is going to bring into being.
So we wanted to start right out with asking you, you have made the bold statement that it is right to want state power, that state power in the hands of the right people and the right class is a great thing. And to wildly understate it, this is not how most people think about state power. Why is state power a great thing?
Well, you have to begin with what you referred to, in the hands of the right class of people, the right kind of state power based on the right kind of system. One reason why a lot of people may not think state power is so great is because they're living under the exercise of it by these monstrous oppressors. So the idea, the idea is promoted, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and all this bullshit from some British lord, So, people are, inclined to look at the way things are now and how power is exercised and have a hard time imagining it could be exercised in a different way by different people. And so the reason I say state power is a great thing is because in order to do all the things that we need to do to uproot all this oppression, you have to have power in society in order to do them. I mean, the reason we can't do them now is because the wrong people, that is a class of exploiters, the capitalist imperialists, have state power and use that state power to suppress any attempt at seriously uprooting all this oppression. So we need a different kind of state power, a socialist state power that first of all is radically different in terms of what it's based on, what it's aiming for, and also whom it involves in the exercise of state power. It's involving the masses of people increasingly in playing an initiating role and a conscious role in transforming society. And unlike the present system, socialist state power backs up the masses of people in moving to uproot all this oppression, while it also provides leadership to them to see what they're up against, what are the contradictions they have to break through on in order to uproot all this, and how to wage that struggle. So it's a completely different kind of state power. Any idea, just think about it. Any idea that you were going to overthrow the existing system and then you're not going to have any state power, guess what happens? You are going to have state power. It's going to be the state power you just overthrew will be back in power in a quick minute. So the whole idea that you can do without a state, without state power, yes, you need a radically different kind of state power, but you need power to be able to lead masses of people and back them up in making all these transformations. What happens now when people go out? First of all, the state power, I'll just back up a second, will be radically different. You're not going to have a police force that murders people on a daily basis in order to maintain a system of oppression. The police forces, we will need police forces, we will need armed forces to defend the revolution. But these forces will be radically different. They will be the masses of people who have risen up to make the revolution in the first place. That's from whom the police and the armed forces will be drawn. And I've made the statement before. Some people say, "Whoa, wait a minute! You're going to take all these people out here running around right now, shooting each other and selling drugs, and you're going to give them state power?" I don't think so. I don't think I want to be part of that. No, we're not talking about people as they are now. We're talking about people. Go back with the question that Andy raised in a previous talk. The previous interview we were doing, people as they've been radically transformed, as they've radically transformed themselves on the basis of being struggled with in the course of transforming the world and making revolution. So then, the state power is going to be in the hands of masses of people who've been struggled with to be emancipators of humanity and to make a revolution on that basis. And, there's a lot of experience in the history of revolution, and particularly communist revolution, that we can draw from, that it is possible to transform people. Like when they made the revolution in China, for example, which took a different path, just to be clear, for anybody out there, just to be clear, was a revolution that in those particular circumstances was made by waging armed struggle from the very, very beginning. Armed struggle from the beginning and throughout. That was the character of the Chinese Revolution because of the particular character of Chinese society and the conditions that they were dealing with. Our revolution is different. It's a period of carrying out the three prepares through political and ideological work and, yes, standing up and defending the people and fighting the power, but not attempting to wage an armed struggle until the conditions for that have been brought into being. That's where the three prepares come in. That's what we're working toward, but that's not what we're doing now. But there's still something to learn from the Chinese Revolution. When Mao started up the People's War in China, the armed struggle against the existing oppressive government and the imperialists who were behind it, the U.S. and Britain in particular, he said, I went to the brave elements, what we might call the brothers and sisters on the street, in our circumstances. He said, I went to them because they weren't afraid to die. But then a tremendous amount of struggle had to be waged. What's this about? What's this armed struggle for? This is not armed struggle to go out and rip off people. They had to have points of attention, to make sure that the people were adhering to the principles of the revolution and applying the principles of the revolution. Things like you don't take a needle or a thread from the masses of people. You don't go about, this was mainly a male army at that time, although the masses of women did become involved. You don't go abusing women. There are different principles here that had to do with the revolution that we're carrying out. And there was struggle, and that's why they had to have those points of discipline and points of attention. So we're talking about masses of people who've been transformed through struggle and transforming themselves in order to bring about the revolution we're talking about and bring into being the necessary state power. But that state power, once established, will be completely different, radically different. The role of state power and whether it really serves the revolution to emancipate the masses of people or whether it actually constitutes another oppressive force over the masses of people is determined by the content of that state power, by the line, the politics and ideology and program that it's based on and that is leading it. That's how you know, and that's how the masses of people can be led to evaluate what's the character of this state power. Is this state power that's standing above the mass of people and turning into an oppressive force that's going to actually restore the old system of exploitation and oppression? Or is this a state power by its content, by its actions, by the way it's being led, by what it's fighting for, by what's guiding it, is actually backing up and supporting the masses of people in emancipating themselves and supporting the revolution throughout the world toward the same goal of emancipation, uprooting and eliminating all antagonistic conflicts among people, all forms of oppression and exploitation. But that's why state power, yes, I want us to have state power, not the three of us sitting here, but the masses of people who've risen up to make a revolution so that they can carry through what they fought for in that revolution. And yes, so that they can actually back up the masses of people in carrying out those transformations and prevent anyone from actually overthrowing the system that exists and re-enslaving the masses of people. So, this is why state power, socialist state power, is a great thing to have. And it's something we should, everyone who wants to see a more just world should be hungering for this state power, not worrying about what it'll be like. Yeah, there needs to be a struggle over what it's going to be like, and that will be an ongoing struggle. But we should be primarily hungering for that state power because that's the power that will enable these transformations I'm talking about. Now, to be clear, since I said it will prevent people from overthrowing the socialist system, that doesn't mean that there won't be allowance for dissent. Doesn't mean that we don't need a lot of intellectual and cultural ferment. We do. That's all embodied in the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. Anyone who raises objections to what the government is doing or what the policies are, or even to the very existence of a socialist state, will be allowed to do so. And there will even be ways that criticism is encouraged and fostered and dissent because you need that. You need to know what your shortcomings are. And the masses of people need to thrash out what's right and wrong, what will really lead to on the road of emancipation, and what, even though it might say it's doing that, is actually leading back to the old way. So, there'll be a flourishing and even a promotion of dissent. By that I mean even in the, in the arts and the media and so on, provision made for people to have a vehicle to criticize and raise dissent, even while, people who try to violently overthrow the new socialist system will be prevented from doing so. Oh, well, you're just like the people in power now. That's what they say. You can dissent as long as you don't try to seriously challenge them. Well, no, we're not just like them. For one thing, they don't encourage and promote dissent. They limit dissent within a very narrow sphere. But second of all, once again, we're back to what's the nature, what's the character of that state power? And the reason we're not like them is because what the state power is for, what it concretely does, what it supports the masses of people in doing, what philosophy or ideology, what program, what politics, what social relations, it's all embodying and promoting, which are the complete and direct opposite of what exists under this system. So no, we're not just like them at all. We're radically different.
Just going in this direction, in our first discussion, the first of these three interviews, we spoke of how the new communism repudiates the idea of the ends justifies the means, that a movement led with revenge, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, will just result in the reinstitution of an oppressive society if it ever gets out of one. You've also spoken to the importance of people who step into the revolution, especially those who step forward to be strategic commanders of the revolution, need to and should want to have, I think you've put it, a largeness of mind and a generosity of spirit, while also waging very sharp struggle. We've talked about this today, very sharp struggle with the masses of people to stop thinking in the ways of this system. So we were talking, I think, important to get into this generosity of spirit, broad-mindedness, and yet being very sharp with people to get out of what they've been into. And this relates to this question of, this isn't about the last shall be first or the first shall be last, but of transforming and bringing forward new people through revolution, and then especially in this new society that helps people become and realize their potential to be full human beings with that generosity of spirit.
Yeah, well, I think this question of the ends, rejecting, repudiating, and being determined to root out the communist movement and rooting out of society more generally, what is a very poisonous notion and practice of the ends justifies the means. It goes back to your previous question, too, where people say, people will say, okay, I can, you hear this all the time. You hear it on commentators on the, bourgeois media, MSNBC, CNN, or whatever, and you hear it broadly in society. People say, okay, I can see how in the actual legal arena, when people are actually on trial, then the presumption of innocence should apply, which they don't really believe in the first place, most of them. But they'll say that, but, when you're talking about conflicts, that are not in the legal arena, then that doesn't really apply. Then you just have to go by what you think is actually, the case, and you have to believe people who claim that they were mistreated. And, this is another application of the means, justify, the ends justify the means. That, okay, and it's also faulty, logic. Because something is true, let's say, in 90% of the cases, doesn't mean it's true in every case. Let's take the question of, the sexual assault of women, which is a very big question in society and obviously a very big focal point of necessary struggle. And I've made a statement about that when the Me Too thing started up, supporting that. But there's also a negative trend that's arisen. It gets expressed as, quote unquote, believe all women, or I believe so-and-so, when you haven't really looked into it. But it just, you're going off the fact that if you want to go by statistics, let's say a woman is accused, it's she said, he said. Well, the she is probably telling the truth, overwhelmingly majority of occasions. But that doesn't prove that it's true in any particular case. And once you throw out the principle of going by evidence, then you go onto very dangerous territory. And people in this society are very quick to make judgments without the basis for it. You know, there's a whole, Sang Freud thing, of like, just going after people because they become a target. And you want to pile on. You even want to be the Schadenfreude. That's the word I meant, not Songfreud. Sorry, Schadenfreude thing. It's another German expression. It means you want to rip into people. So not only do people want to pile on, but they want to be the first one. I'm the first one on social media to denounce this person as soon as they're accused. And you'll see articles where people say, so-and-so is accused of this. So then you sound like, okay, it's being reasonable. They're being accused of this. And then the next thing they'll say is, and it's very important to hear from their victims. Well, now, if you're just recognizing that they're being accused, you don't know if they have victims or not. But the logic prevails that as soon as somebody's accused, they must be guilty. This prevails in the society at large. That's why the presumption of innocence is a joke. And it's being fostered now, including by all these woke types and everything. And it may seem relatively harmless because people doing this don't have state power. But, it can be used by people who do it, and is used by people who do have state power. And God forbid, if people like this ever came to have state power, would anybody want to live in a society where people apply the principle that as soon as you're accused, you're guilty? If there's not a basis for a legal procedure to determine innocence and guilt, then unless it's very obvious, unless the person accused is basically admitting that they did what they're accused of, you don't have a basis for making judgments about whether what they're accused of is true or not. And you shouldn't be leaping to make judgments like that because it's very harmful, and it sets a very harmful tone and culture in society, where people are ripping each other down. And, again, once you throw out, this is a grotesque example or expression of the ends justify the means. Because, a lot of terrible oppression goes on, therefore, who cares if we trample all over basic principles, because after all, we have to do something about the fact that people are being oppressed. Isn't that what we've always been accused of? Isn't what communists have always been accused of? Because we're for ending oppression, it's all right that we go and trample all over people's rights and just catch a whole bunch of people up in something that they may not be guilty of because it's for the greater good. And after all, most people probably are doing the things that we're accusing them of. You see how terrible this can be and is. And the whole tone it sets in society. And it's very, once again, anti-scientific. You're not going by evidence. You're not even really looking for evidence. You're just looking, once again, the Schadenfreude. You're just looking for a chance to tear somebody down because you don't think you have anything that you can do that's more meaningful than that. And this kind of stuff, we talk about the ends justify the means, is extremely poisonous and really does need to be rooted out. And that, that doesn't mean, for example, that when women come forward and say they've been sexually assaulted, they should be taken very seriously, unless the claim can quickly be shown to be without foundation. But in general, they should be taken extremely seriously. But taking them seriously means looking into it and investigating it, not automatically believing them. And you can go down the line, because once you fall into that, you're going to a very bad place. And any kind of society that would function on those principles, and it is way too much already now, would be a terrible society to live in. And, on top of everything else that we've been talking about how terrible this society is. So I just wanted to say that about your, how this links up the ends justify the means. So I'm sorry, but what was the rest of the question?
Well, I think I think it's very important, and it does permeate. It's the poison that's in that we have to actually struggle against. But there are also the concept in there of the generosity of spirit, the largeness of mind. Now I'll date myself too, because I also followed actually was opposed to the Green Bay Packers, which is an NFL football team, but there was a coach, I think it was Vince Lombardi, who said, "Nice guys finish last," was it, right? That's what
yeah.
Yeah, and you once said in response to that, well, we have to finish first, we have to win, but we're going to do it as nice guys. And that doesn't mean we're going to be soft, as you spoke to earlier, but I thought it was important to get into what's meant by the largeness of mind, generosity of spirit, and as you said earlier, being for the emancipation of humanity, and you said in the dialogue with Cornel West, to love is not being soft.
Yeah, well, I think largest of mind and generosity of spirit are closely connected. Largest of mind means that you are looking at things, in a broad perspective, not narrowly, but you're actually looking at things broadly and seeking, also you're seeking the underlying causes of things, but also you want to, learn from and encompass a lot of different things coming from a lot of different sources. That's a very important part of largest of mind. Like we should be, the most, anxious to learn from any source that we can learn from. Even people who vehemently disagree with us, if there's something that we can learn from what they're saying, even if we have to disagree with 97% of it or more. So that largest of mind means the orientation of learning from broadly from many diverse sources, including people who do not agree with you. And that's very important, because it is true that even, as I've said, under socialism, even reactionaries should be allowed to publish some books. I said that before the Constitution was written, which institutionalizes that. But why is that? Because you can learn. I'll give you an example from my own experience. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an official, I think he was a defense secretary under Carter, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's a major functionary and thinker of the imperialists, wrote about the Russian Revolution that the tradition of autocracy, and I'll explain that in a second, the tradition of autocracy in Russia seeped its way into the Bolsheviks, the communists, and that explains why they were repressive. Now, autocracy is a government that, that doesn't allow people rights, that rules by absolute authority and so on and so forth. And he said, this tradition, what was he talking about? In Russia, they had a whole tradition of absolute monarchs, the czars, whose power was unquestioned for a long time. They were the absolute and ultimate authority in society. So that was a tradition of autocracy, so to speak. And that's what Brzezinski was talking about. So he wrote this thing and he said, this applied to the Russian Revolution. This tradition, and deeply seated in Russian society, also influenced the Bolsheviks and led them to be repressive. And I wrote and I said, this is a bunch of bullshit, because the Bolshevik Revolution was against everything that the autocracy, the czars, and every oppressive and exploitative relation in society. So this is complete bullshit. So then I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, actually, it's not complete bullshit. So when you think about it, there's probably some truth to that, like Mao said about Stalin, that one of Stalin's problems methodologically was he was raised in a religious seminary where he was taught to, to think in the kind of absolute wooden terms that religion trains you to think. And he said this carried over into the way he led the communist movement and the socialist society. And he upheld Stalin overall, but he said this was a serious problem with Stalin. So similarly, we could say in the Russian Revolution, there was undoubtedly influence of the character of that society, even on the people who were, to use these terms, negating that society, overthrowing it and transforming and replacing it. There was still some influence there. So then, after thinking about it, I wrote something, followed up, and said, well, he has something of a point. So this is an example where you can learn, and you have to be willing to learn from people who, look, we're completely on the opposite side of everything, and when it comes down to it, we'll be on the opposite side of the barricades, so to speak, from the Brzezinskis of the world. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn anything from them. And that's why I said even reactionaries should be allowed to write books in socialist society, because they may point out some things about what we're doing that we would actually want to understand are bad, even though where they're coming from is trying to get rid of what we're seeking to do. You see what I'm saying? So that has to do with largeness of mind. Now, generosity of spirit is closely connected to that, but also involves the whole point we've been talking about. What is this revolution for? It's not for revenge. Mm-hmm. It's not just to tear down other people in order to climb over them. That's what Lenin meant when he said, everyone who makes revolution from the standpoint of they had their chance, now it's my turn to have a go, does it from the point of view of the petty bourgeoisie. And what he meant is it's characteristic of the petty bourgeoisie. They feel squeezed. They want to climb over others to get a better position. So that's not what this revolution is about. It's not about climbing over others. It's not about taking revenge. Even when people have done terrible things, it's not about taking revenge on people. If people have committed terrible crimes, and the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America institutionalizes this, there are legal means in which they should be tried and, if convicted, punished for the crimes that they've committed, including crimes against humanity and war crimes and the rest of it. But it's not a matter of individuals taking revenge. If we go down that road, it's the same problem I was just speaking to. Then you get back to the ends justify the means. Any means are justified because of what we suffered. And let's be honest. When you talk about how we got to struggle with masses of people, this is going to be one of the sharpest focus of struggle, especially with people who have been so badly fucked over under the present system, including by people who do have a little bit better position than them. I mean, this is one thing also, going way back to the woke thing. What should our focus be on, micro or macro? You see, macro means the large picture. Micro means the smallest picture. A lot of these people are focused on all the microaggressions. Okay, nobody should put up with people being racist toward them or, patriarchal toward them, misogynist. Nobody should put up with that in their personal relations. But where is your eye focused? It should be focused on the big macro, the big picture of what's going on to masses of people. That should be where your orientation and your focus is. On the thousands of people that are, the 1,000 people who are murdered every year by the police, a disproportionate number of black, brown, and Native American, many of them unarmed. The millions of people who are mass incarcerated, the people who are discriminated against, segregated, denied any kind of a decent life, forced to live in poverty or even homeless, the women who are subjected to battering and rape and all the rest of it. Those are the bigger things that our attention should be focused on in terms of uprooting all of this. And yes, with it, we'll transform these microaggressions too. But our focus has to be on the big picture. The macro means big, the big picture. So this is also very important. What was I saying before? Generosity of spirit. Okay, let's get back to that. Well, you can see how this figures in here. What is this revolution about? Why should we have generosity of spirit? Because we're emancipators of humanity. We're not about, settling scores. We're not about, ripping into people for things they've done wrong. If they've done wrong, they need to be held accountable, but we also need to struggle to transform people. That's what this revolution is about. And the generosity of spirit flows from that. If you understand that we're seeking to uproot, it both flows from it and is necessary to reinforce it. But let me put it that way. If you understand that what we're out to do is to uproot all this exploitation and oppression, then you should have a largeness of mind, including learning from everything you can learn and everyone you can learn from, but also a generosity of spirit, recognizing that people, contrary to what's often said these days, people can and do change. I can sit here and give you examples of multiple people that I know, including myself for that matter, but other people I know from the 60s and so on and since, who've undergone major transformation, major changes, people who are into really bad shit, or supporting really bad things. People who were Goldwater supporters back in the 1960s who became radicals and revolutionaries through the course of the 60s. Soldiers who, in Vietnam committed terrible atrocities, as I've said before. Go down the line. People can transform. And one of the dimensions of generosity of spirit is recognizing that. And then, it's perfectly consistent with that, and in fact an expression of it, that you're going to struggle like hell with people to get them to transform, exactly because you do recognize that they can and that they need to. You're not going to be liberal. It doesn't do any good to be liberal with people. People don't need any more social workers. You know, I'm not saying all social workers do bad things, just to be clear, but that's not what communists need to be. That's not what people recognize the need for overturning this whole system, uprooting it, and bringing a different system into being. Don't need to be, don't need to be just, giving people some kind of solace or something, or, being liberal with them. When people talk bullshit, they should be told they're talking bullshit because it's harmful. It's harmful to them, but it's harmful to much, much greater numbers of people when people are caught up in bullshit. So why should we hesitate to struggle with people? If you have respect for people, you will struggle with them. It's a lack of respect for people if you don't struggle with them when you know they're doing things that are fucked up. If you really respect people and understand the potential for them to change, you will struggle like hell with people. And we can all sit here and know that we've all been struggled with. By people, who at the time had a better, were coming from a better place than us. You go back to anybody's history. You get where you are now to being an emancipator of humanity. You weren't born that way, and you didn't spontaneously go that way. People fought with you. People struggled with you, and you learned from them. So, to me, it's the highest respect for people if you struggle. Not if you just try to tear them down. Not if all your concern is like proving that you're superior to them or that they're just worthless and irredeemable and all this kind of bullshit. But if you actually understand that they can and must change, then you have enough respect for them to struggle like hell with them, to actually act in their own interests and the interests of the broad mass of people and ultimately all humanity. So you're going to struggle like hell with them for that.